Hello, and welcome to another day of Living with Spina Bifida. Today, we are going to talk about ableism. What is ableism? Ableism is the term used for the privileging of able-bodiedness, resulting in discrimination or social prejudice against people with disabilities. Ableism characterizes persons as defined by their disabilities and as inferior to the non-disabled. Discrimination faced by those who have or are perceived to have a mental disorder is sometimes called mentalism rather than ableism. In ableist societies, able-bodiedness is seen as the norm. People with disabilities are viewed as deviating from that norm. A disability is seen as something to overcome or to fix, for example, through medical treatments. The ableist worldview holds that disability is an error or a failing rather than a simple consequence of human diversity, akin to race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or gender. Other definitions of ableism include ideas, practices, institutions, and social relations that presume able-bodiedness and by so doing construct persons with disability as marginal and largely invisible others. Also, doctrine that falsely treats impairments as inherently and naturally horrible and blames the impairments on themselves for the problems experienced by the people who have them. Within communities of people with disabilities, there is a disagreement about whether referring to themselves as disabled counts as internalized ableism. These groups may prefer the terms non-neurotypical or neurodivergent for mental divergences or non-common-bodied for physical divergences. For those who do call themselves disabled, most prefer being referred to as disabled people rather than people with disabilities, because the latter uses person-first language that separates the person from the disability, rather than identity-first language. In effect, it denies that their disability is a part of who they are, and thereby denies the ableism itself. It is argued that the term ableism is a powerful label that has the capacity to ameliorate the use of negative stereotypes and facilitate cultural change by focusing attention on the discriminator rather than on the victim of impairment. An individual that expresses hostility towards disabled people is called an able-bodyist. One who focuses on the able-bodied people to the exclusion of disabled people may rarely be called an able-centrist. The Oxford English Dictionary traces the word ableism back to 1981. Likely the word was in use amongst activists before then. Discrimination in favor of able-bodied people, prejudice against or disregard of the needs of disabled people. Ableism, that is, systemic oppression of a group of people because of what they can or cannot do with their body or minds, the result of ignorance. Like racism and sexism, ableism is a form of discrimination against people. Unlike racism and sexism, ableism is sometimes invisible, as it has less to do with hating the disabled and more to do with assumptions about normal ability status. Racism, sexism, and other forms of discrimination are in the news fairly often. As a developed society, people tend to look at forms of discrimination as problems. This is particularly true if the discrimination is institutionalized through the government. Institutionalization is a sociological term that describes when a concept becomes intertwined with the government, society, or other institution. So, ableism seems pretty straightforward, right? Well, not exactly. It's actually pretty complex. The word is ableist because it is a way of looking at the world as if everybody had more or less functional bodies and minds. These able-bodied individuals become the norm. When someone who is not able to engage in certain activities comes along, someone disabled, he or she can feel as if the world has left them out. Notice that this is a set of assumptions of what is considered normal, rather than outright hatred of a group of people like racial or ethnic discrimination. Instead, ableism generally exists as a form of negligence. People without disabilities don't typically have to think of things like the disabled do, and so they neglect to address their needs. What form does ableism take? Well, first we need to clarify the difference between non-institutionalized and institutionalized behaviors. Let's look at non-institutionalized first. If someone's home is not accessible to wheelchairs, this may technically be ableist. However, if a family does not count a person who uses a wheelchair among them, it is unlikely that this lack of access is a problem under most circumstances. Now let's look at an institutionalized behavior. What if the building was a public building or business? In these cases, people who use wheelchairs will be unable to access these facilities, not including ramps or similar options for disabled individuals to access these buildings. Owners are discriminating against them. If the building in question is a public courthouse or clerk's office, the discrimination is doubly problematic, as excluded individuals are being denied same rights to access the building as everyone else. So, as you can tell, ableism is quite a problem in this society. But the even bigger problem is it's not very much talked about. So unless you are disabled yourself, or you spend a lot of your time with someone who is disabled, then you probably don't realize the discrimination that is happening to people with disabilities. Whether it be in a store, the aisles are not wide enough for wheelchairs to fit through. Sometimes even bathroom stalls that are meant for wheelchairs don't always fit the wheelchairs in them properly. I know this from experience. Or oftentimes people will look at people with disabilities as an inspiration, because they don't look at them as a normal person. They look at them as a person with a disability. And they think just because they did something of very little effort, then they are doing something miraculous. And because they willed themselves to do that thing, they willed themselves to go shopping because their lives are so difficult because they have a disability, that they inspire the able-bodied person to be more proactive in their lives and be more of a better person. Because if the person with a disability can do it, then why can't the able-bodied person do it too? That is ableism, assuming that the person with the disability is a less than because they have a disability. And that will definitely be a topic of its own at one time or another. So, the next time you go into a store, maybe think about, would a wheelchair be able to fit through these aisles? Especially if you are in a place that sells clothes. They have those round clothing racks. Think about that. Do you think a wheelchair that is wide enough to hold a body and then has wheels sprouted out of it, do you think those tiny little areas are going to fit a wheelchair in it? Just think about that. A lot of businesses definitely don't think about that. And just something to open your eyes a little bit, even if it's not really that relevant to your life, because people with disabilities don't really come to your home that often. But think about how wheelchair accessible is your house. So hopefully, starting now and in further videos, this will start getting you thinking that just because we do have disabilities, just because we talk about the disabilities, it doesn't mean that's all that we are. We are people. We have needs and wants and ambitions and abilities just like everyone else. We just do them differently.